Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet Preview Series presented by OTGBasketball.com. Make sure to follow OTG on Twitter at OTGBasketball. Also hit that subscribe button. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me on these preview pods, Kory Waldron and international guest, Jack Manuell. How you doing, fellas?
Howdy, OTG fans.
Here we go. The Fantastic Three back at it.
Yeah.
But on to number 17 today, the New Orleans Pelicans. Before we talk Pels, let's talk about them from last season. Obviously, they made some big moves, picked up DeMarcus Cousins. They had a rough start to the season, and they dealt with injuries almost like every year. What are your thoughts on the Pelicans from last year?
Yeah, it was really up and down. They started off the season incredibly poorly, losing 10 of their first 12 games, and they lost their first 8, even though Davis was absolutely balling out. They never really got any consistency, and they didn't really develop much of an identity outside of Anthony Davis. And then adding in DeMarcus Cousins after the All-Star break, they still didn't really get much of a consistency despite the two star power of those two guys in the front court.
Yeah, it was a team – the Pelicans are one of those teams where, when you see Anthony Davis on the roster, and obviously they got DeMarcus Cousins late in the season, so he didn't really get a chance to make a full impact. You just always expect, when you see a superstar in the league, because Anthony Davis is, right on that tier of being a superstar, you expect him to be better. And, besides losing to the Warriors, I think 2 years ago in the first round, this team really hasn't done anything. This is also a team that it seems every year they lose about 5 or 10 players to injuries. It's just I don't know what it is about New Orleans, maybe something in the water, but guys don't seem to be able to stay healthy down there. It was definitely just a season of disappointment. But, getting DeMarcus Cousins for what they got him for, at least for now, the future looks very good.
Yeah, you mentioned the injuries. The Pelicans, I believe, had 28 different starting lineups last season. So just a ton of injuries all over the board. It seemed like everybody on the team was injured at some point. And you guys mentioned DeMarcus Cousins, coming over from Sacramento. What do you think about that combo moving forward? Do you think, that's one of the best duos in the NBA and it's going to leave the Pelicans to the playoffs, or they're going to struggle because of the small ball NBA?
Look, it could really go either way. Alvin Gentry was on a local radio station saying that he's happy to go the opposite way of what today's NBA is going. Everyone's going small, so let's go big. It's going to be interesting to see. I think it lies with those two guys, how they are going to defend. For me, that's the biggest thing. They've got all the offensive talent in the world, and Davis is quite a capable defender. DeMarcus Cousins, notably, has slimmed down this offseason. So hopefully he can defend the perimeter a little bit more. So, how are they going to defend players like Draymond Green, Kevin Durant, those sort of small ball lineups? If they can capably defend, then there's a huge ceiling for this team. But I'm not going to buy it until I see it.
I'm actually a big fan of what the Pelicans are trying to do. I'm not positive that they have the shooting yet. They added Ian. We'll talk about who they added. But, last year they didn't have a lot of three-point shooters. So even getting Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, if you can't space the floor, your big man can't do everything they're capable of doing. Jrue Holiday is a very good point guard. Adding Rondo, I think, helps them. I think this team, being built around two big guys with Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, I think this is the best formula, in my opinion, to actually beat the Warriors. Because of the rebounding and presence around the rim, I think this team could really be an issue for the Warriors. We know the Warriors don't have a lot of size down low. They have Zaza Pachulia, JaVale McGee, and then Draymond Green. And if Cousins and Anthony Davis can find some chemistry, can play very well, alongside of each other, you add some solid 3-and-D wing defenders, I think this team could actually be, one of the biggest issues for a team like the Golden State Warriors.
Well, I think Jack hit it on the head. For this team to be an issue for the Warriors, they're going to have to first prove they can defend on the perimeter. DeMarcus Cousins, if he's slimmed down, he can move a lot better. We know Anthony Davis. We know his abilities. We know that he can probably guard some 2s, 3s, and 4s and 5s in this league. So it's about Cousins and his ability to defend on the perimeter. But I thought you brought up a good point, Kory, before when you mentioned, that you see a team with Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins, and a Jrue Holiday. You're like, oh, why isn't this team better? But I think this kind of, exemplifies you need to have a good team in the NBA to be good. You can't just have a few good players. You need to have depth, and you need to have players at other positions that can contribute, and that's an issue for the Pelicans.
I think that goes back to their front office a little bit. Dell Demps has probably been on the hot seat for quite a while, and he's never been able to fully build around Anthony Davis in the past few years. And, you should be, if you have a superstar talent, a top 5, top 10 talent in Anthony Davis, you should be able to surround him with pieces that utilize his capabilities. 3-and-D guys are generally a dime a dozen. Jonathan Simmons went for nothing to Orlando. Surely they should have made a play at someone like him. If they can't build around Anthony Davis, then he's going to leave. I mean, I'm sure that'll come up throughout the season, and Boogie could leave as well, and Dell Demps could be out of a job. But I think it comes down to the organizational stability, and New Orleans rarely has that. And I think Dell Demps is definitely going to be under the hot seat.
Well, they made some bad moves in the past off seasons. That's why they were so cap-strapped this year. And, like you said, they haven't really been able to give Anthony Davis the team that he wants. Luckily for them, he doesn't seem to be too upset about it, but eventually it'll probably get to him. I think he's under contract for 4 more years. But like you said, Cousins could be an issue because he's only on contract to the end of this year. He seems to really like New Orleans with Anthony Davis, but, that could change if you don't make the playoffs. What's your highlight for the Pelicans for last season?
I've got a player highlight and then got a sort of a games highlight. So Anthony Davis, I think it goes without saying, he took another step in his development into being like a bona fide superstar. He posted some ridiculous stats. He had like 36 games with 30 points or more, including a monster 50 on opening night. And then there was this one game in January where Davis was, funnily enough, out injured and allowing a player who's actually currently in China, Terrence Jones, and he balled out against the Cavs. He posted an equal career high 36 points. And this was against the full-strength Cavs with Kevin Love, Kyrie Irving, and LeBron James. I remember just looking through, I'm like, how is this actually happening? And the team was completely different. They had Tyreek Evans as well. So it seemed like that was – if they had Terrence Jones right now and Tyreek Evans still on that roster, I feel like this New Orleans Pelicans team would be completely different. But both of those guys are out in their own respective fields.
Yeah, I mean, Terrence Jones, he's in a weird situation. No one has assigned him, and things just really didn't work out in New Orleans. And I think Tyreek Evans, they probably looked away from him because he's just such a guy that needs the ball in his hands, and they want somebody who's more of a, it's going to just be a 3-and-D guy, sit in the corner and be more of a complementary piece. But who knows? Kory, what about you? Highlight for the Pels last season?
I mean, it's tough to find a highlight from a team that obviously struggled. I think it's obviously the clear-cut answer is Anthony Davis, the Brow himself. Like you said, Jack, opening night, he comes out and drops 50. This is a guy who averaged 28 and 11 last year. Anthony Davis is one of those like once in a lifetime kind of players to watch. We really don't see guys at his size and height be able to remember him coming out of college. This was a guy who offensively had nothing. And now we're talking about a guy who, if he stays healthy, can still win an MVP. We're talking about a guy also who's 23 years, who's going to be 24 years old. And, last year he was able to stay on the floor for majority of the games, playing his career high 75 games. For me, Anthony Davis was probably the brightest spot and just the overall highlight because almost every night he was a double-double machine.
Well, I think you hit it on the head when you said the 75 games. The fact that he was able to play almost a whole season, that's a huge highlight. And the fact that he's only 23 and his game's, established this far, he just adds a few more things, improves his three-point shooting, improves as a playmaker, becomes more consistent on the floor. And you're looking at, a top 5 player, and like you guys said, an MVP candidate. But biggest disappointment for the Pelicans last season?
The entire support cast and that entire front office. I'm probably going to hate on them quite a bit and don't hate me, Peli fans. I mean, I barely have any followers on Twitter. I'm sure none of them are really Pelicans fans. But, the entire support cast, and that's no fault of the roster or Alvin Gentry. It's Dell Demps for me. And that DeMarcus Cousins move has just delayed the inevitable for me. I mean, I can't see them going any further next year. They've got a decent ceiling, but they still don't have the 3-and-D guys that they need, and especially shipping Quincy Pondexter, which we're going to see, and the injury to Solomon Hill, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well. So that entire support cast outside of Anthony Davis for me was a disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much you can pick out any guy on that supporting cast and wave your finger at them as a disappointment. I'm going to pick out a guy in particular just because it's funny. Amir Asik, a guy who gets paid $10 million a year to play 15 and a half minutes for only 31 games. I'm pretty sure he missed time last year with an injury. But, that guy, after he left Chicago, got the big deal with Houston, and he went to the Pelicans. And, this guy just keeps getting worse and worse the older he gets. And having $10 million locked up, if you could move this contract off the books, you could add a guy like Jonathan Simmons, who obviously went to Orlando for pretty cheap. They got a lot of bigs on this team, and almost any big who's not Anthony Davis to Marcus Cousins is pretty pathetic on this roster.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. He's probably one of the worst contracts in the NBA. And I think, biggest disappointment probably is just the constant injuries. Like you mentioned it before, the last 2 seasons they dealt with injuries. This year they dealt with injuries. And then also I thought one thing that was interesting. I don't know if you guys know who Wayne Selden is. He's a wing on the Grizzlies. He played some playoff minutes. He was on the Pelicans roster at one point last season, but they let him go. Obviously, we know this team really needs wings. Probably should have kept him. I think that would probably be a big disappointment considering the wing depth that they have. We'll talk about that a little later, though.
26 people, guys. This team had 26 players play NBA minutes last season. 26. That's almost 2 full teams. That's almost 2 full rosters touch the court for the Pelicans.
I think a lot on that, what you're saying, Kory, a lot has to be checked into this training stuff. Chicago have gotten plenty of shit over the day, but I think this New Orleans, and I listened to a few, in research, I listened to a few New Orleans local podcasts and local interviews and stuff, and they are savage on the training stuff and how some of the New Orleans Saints staff that was fired from the NFL franchise moved straight to the Pelicans team despite some controversy. So I think health is the number one thing in the NBA. You can keep your best players on the floor. Look at the Golden State Warriors. KD was the only major injury that they suffered towards the end of the year. They had a few games missed here and there, but nothing really serious. Anthony Davis luckily stayed healthy, playing those 75 games. But I think there needs to be a really hard look into this training stuff because it's highly important and it can't be understated.
Yeah, no, that's 100% true. You need to either, invest in some new equipment or some new people on the staff, or maybe both, because you can't be having guys miss this much time, especially when you're paying them this big of money and you have a player like Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins on your roster that want to make the playoffs. You need people healthy. So that'll be a big issue for the Pels this year. But let's talk ranking. The Pelicans are coming in at number 17 in our rankings, which would put them, I think, around the 11th and 10th spot in the West. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's about standard. I've rarely agreed with the power rankings that us at OTG have come with, but I agree with this one. Seems right on the mark.
Yeah, this is pretty accurate. With a team that has a lot of question marks, as we mentioned, it's pretty safe to say that this team is not in the bottom half, not the bottom 10 of the league, but they're definitely not up in the upper echelon. This is pretty perfect for the Pelicans.
Yeah, it's weird to see a team with probably, a top 5 center and probably the best power forward in the NBA on the same team and not able to, be in the top 15 or top 12 in the rankings. I think it kind of touches on what, like I mentioned before, the rest of the roster needs improvement. And there's a lot of question marks if some of these young guys can step up and also all the injuries that they've already had this season. So I think 17 is pretty fair. There's potential to be higher and there's potential to be lower. Yeah,
it could certainly go either way. I think when we get to the emojis thing, and there's a lot of words you could sum up with. There's a lot of potential upside for this franchise, but there's also a lot of potential downside for this franchise. It's a make or break year, and I think this ranking could go either way, really.
Yeah, I think the postseason is going to be really, really big for the Pels this year.
I think, if this, we'll obviously talk about this in a little bit, but if this team wants to stumble out of the gate, I mean, we could be talking about a team that blows it up and becomes the worst team in the NBA before, because if you have to move a piece like Anthony Davis to Marcus Cousins because you stumble, we're talking about a team that will be wretched if they have to move either one of those guys.
Yeah, that's very true. It is a possibility. I don't know as much about Anthony Davis because he's under contract longer, and I don't know if you'll ever get value for a top 7 player the right way. But I think Cousins is, a real possibility, especially like you said, if they stumble or it just isn't looking good for the playoffs. But let's talk additions. Obviously, they didn't have a big draft. They drafted Frank Mason. Any thoughts on him?
I didn't mind him. I've taken a look at. He sort of would have fit in nicely into as a shooter into their roster, but unfortunately.
Oh, actually, I was mistaken, Jack. Sorry. Yeah, the addition actually was Frank Jackson.
Yeah, that's all right. That's what I was like. Frank Jackson. Yeah, Frank Jackson. Yeah, he taken with the 31st pick after a bit of toing and froing. and trading some late second rounders. I think they got some value out of it. But again, he is injured and is likely to see any early season time. But he would have been a nice addition at the shooting guard small forward position, because he honestly would be, with Ian Clark, probably one of their best shooters. He has a nice form and is a nice prospect. So if he is able to get some minutes, I'm sure he'll definitely see the floor this season.
Yeah, it's funny that he's the son of Alvin Jackson, which I always find funny. But he's a little bit undersized for the shooting guard position at 6'4". But I mean, last year at Duke, we're talking about a guy who averaged 10 points. He shot 39% from three. At this point, if you're the Pelicans, you need anyone who can shoot the ball from deep at least above 35%. I mean, you just need guys who can shoot, because I mean, in the recent past, their best three-point shooter last year was a combination of Drew Holiday and, I mean, probably Tim Frazier or Solomon Hill. And I mean, not many NBA rosters that are winning games have Solomon Hill as their top three-point option.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of last season, DeMarcus Cousins was probably maybe their best three-point shooter.
Yeah, it's rough out there.
Can't have that.
Yeah, I mean, not to say that Cousins hasn't improved a lot from three-point range, but you definitely want some wings that can shoot the ball. But yeah, Frank Jackson, not a huge draft. They obviously traded their first-round pick for in the DeMarcus Cousins trade. But re-signing wise, they re-signed Drew Holiday, signed him to a big deal. What were your thoughts on that?
Look, they were sort of like pinned down. Yeah, they were pinned down by that. He is now the highest paid New Orleans Pelican. He's earning $2 million more than Anthony Davis next year, earning $26 million. And he really needs the faith that the franchise has put him in. He really needs to repay them. He's not obviously going to be an all-star in a really stacked West, but he needs to be a sort of Jeff Teague, George Hill sort of version of himself. Start, fulfilling that promise that he had when he was in Philadelphia, because it was a rough season for him last year with some family issues and stuff. But there is a lot of potential. He's not over the hill in terms of age-wise and well, and he does have some nice chemistry with Anthony Davis. So I think they didn't really have many other options, but it is definitely an overpay.
I like how you used two past Indiana Pacer point guards as a comparison there.
I didn't mean that, but it just happened to be, Kory. I mean, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of what you guys do out there.
But Drew Holiday, it's just, I always worry a guy like this gets money, because we're talking about a guy who, he's missed time almost every season due to injuries or some kind of issue. I mean, $25 million for Drew Holiday it's kind of painful. We're talking about a guy who only averaged 15-7 last year. And I mean, honestly, we can just point this out directly. When they got DeMarcus Cousins, Drew Holiday had a terrible ending to the season. He didn't fit in well. Like it was almost like he lost his place within the offense. He became too passive. He wanted to get too much of DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis involved instead of getting himself going. And I mean, obviously, when you acquire a superstar at the deadline, there's going to be some issues with chemistry. So maybe they can adjust that, through training camp and everything else. But, Drew Holiday needs to be aggressive. He can't be looking to get everyone else involved. I mean, you have Rondo, who we'll talk about probably in a few minutes. He'll be more of the playmaker. I think Drew Holiday will take more of like a two-guard type of role. But, Drew Holiday just needs to be better. If you're making $25 million, you got to be putting up right around, I don't even know. You got to be putting up like 18 points per game. You got to be shooting at least 40% from three. Like, he's got to evolve his game to complement Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. Like, he has to become someone in the offense and not be passive.
Yeah, he needs to become a good complementary piece. And you mentioned Rondo, and I think that's going to have a big impact on him too. But like Jack said, I think the Pelicans were kind of stuck in this situation. Is like, if they didn't sign him back, they weren't going to have the cap space to get another good point guard. So in terms of, having a point guard, or a guard now, because Rondo will probably be the point guard, this could be, a big deal. It's a make or break year for the Pelicans, like we said, and they need Holiday to really step up. And they kind of, like you said, Kory, they need him to be more of a scorer and more of a consistent shooter, and especially on the spot up, because a lot of his threes last year came off the dribble, and, he has the ball in his hands a lot when he was doing well for the Pelicans. Then, like you said, when Cousins came along, he didn't have the ball quite as much, and he was looking to get them involved. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how all this works out. But you mentioned Rondo. We'll talk additions. They signed Rajon Rondo. I think they got him on the cheap. What are your thoughts on him?
Look, it's a decent chemistry addition due to his prior relationship with Boogie at Sacramento, but it's sort of like it reminds me of the Bulls last year. It's an odd fit on court due to his lack of shooting, but at the same time, in terms of just getting a roster that has some talent on it, I don't mind it. But it's going to be, like you were saying, Nick, it's going to require a role shift for Jrue Holiday. He was primarily the point guard and ball handler. He's definitely going to have to shift to an off-ball role, or stagger. Alvin Gentry's going to have to stagger those units a little bit, where he can keep one or both of them on the court at all times. But I don't mind it because we were singing his praises in the Bulls pod. He almost brought the Bulls to an upset playoff series win. So if you can get Rajon Rondo on the cheap, I'd do it. Why not?
Yeah, I love this move. I mean, for $3 million, well, $3.3 million, we're talking about. I mean, if Rondo can play postseason Rondo basketball like he did last year, I mean, we mentioned, like you just mentioned, Jack, his chemistry with DeMarcus Cousins in Sacramento the year before, he put up 11 and 11. He tied his career high for assists that year, 11.7, playing alongside Cousins. We know they have a decent, good friendship. I mean, Rondo could average, 15 assists next year playing alongside Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. I mean, that's just how easy it is to play with two superstar bigs and you're a playmaking point guard like Rondo. Like you said, though, it is an odd fit because, like you said, pretty much like the Bulls last year, this is a team that needs three-point shooters, and you bring in a point guard who I would rather see paint dry than shoot a three.
His percentage is 37% last year. I mean, he might have taken like 8 threes for the entire season, so like 37% of 8 threes. But maybe he's proving he's going to prove us wrong and actually shoot a decent three like Dwayne Wade did in those first sort of 20 games. But maybe it's been something that he's been working on in the off season. We don't know, but I agree. I'm not going to buy into that for sure.
He actually shot 133 threes last year and made 50 of them. So I mean, yeah, that's not awful. I just
they're probably all wide open though. Yeah, let's be honest.
Majority of them probably were, but I think I do like the fact that he has that. He's an NBA champion, obviously, and everyone in not Boston, in Chicago seemed to love Rondo last year, like all the rookies at least. So he gets a bad rep, especially because of the stint in Dallas. But I think Rondo is actually going to be a very good pickup for them for $3.3 million.
I think I would have really liked the Rajon Rondo signing if they didn't re-sign Jrue Holiday. Just because I believe that it's going to impact Jrue Holiday in a negative way. Not because, Rajon Rondo's a ball hog and he's not going to pass it, but Holiday to be effective needs the ball in his hands, and he's not going to have that. Rondo, like you said, he's going to be the playmaker, and he's going to be looking to set up Cousins and Davis. And one issue I have, if you have like another non-shooter on the floor, it's going to make Davis and Cousins kind of step away from the rim a little bit, and that's where they're most successful, and that's not what you want on offense, and you're just going to be suiting Rondo. So I think, Rondo definitely could have a good impact more so as a backup point guard, but when you have to start him next to Jrue Holiday, I don't know if it's going to be the best fit in terms of basketball, especially with all the threes that we see on the floor. Veteran-wise, like you guys mentioned, the locker room presence and his relationship with Bogey is good to have. So I think that could be a positive, but I'm interested in see how Holiday and Rondo will fit. What do you guys think on that duo?
Yeah, look, I like it because I think if Gentry can get the lineups right, and the timing right. So say if you have, you have Rondo and Holiday starting with Boogie and whatever three you've got and Davis, and then you slowly stagger those lineups with, say, you keep Davis and Holiday, like I was mentioning, together on the court because of that chemistry, and then Rondo and Boogie, keep them together while Davis and Holiday off the floor. I think they can slowly but surely experiment early in the season with some lineup changes and see how it works for them. But I think it could reap some dividends for sure.
I like that point. They could do a lot of things where when you're resting two guys. I mean, we saw it in OKC last year. If in the past, like when they would take Westbrook off the floor, they'd leave Kevin Durant on, or they'd take Kevin Durant off to leave Westbrook on, leaving a superstar on. And I like the point with the chemistry between Holiday and Anthony Davis. When you're resting Cousins, just rest Rondo. And then when we want to rest Davis, take Holiday off and put in Rondo. So you could definitely get some nice little on-court and off-court situations. My only issue with playing Rondo and Holiday at the same time is, like you mentioned earlier in the pod, Jack, the perimeter defense. I guess a team like the Warriors, when Curry has to guard Rondo, or Rondo has to guard Curry, and Holiday has to guard Thompson, the Warriors are probably going to eat those guys alive.
Holiday is actually not a bad defender.
But against
Rondo, on the other hand, against a bigger Klay Thompson would be more of an issue. That's just size-wise. But I actually like Holiday as a defender when he's focusing in. He moves his feet well, and he's got pretty good length. Obviously, against a Klay Thompson, the Warriors, nobody's going to do well. But like you said, having Rondo out there as a defensive liability when he's not focused will hurt them, especially if Cousins isn't moving that well. That could be an issue. But we'll talk about the three position a little bit. That's probably the most intriguing thing. They also picked up Ian Clark, which I thought was a really good signing. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I think they're going to be looking for basically the similar production from Clark as he gave the Warriors last season. Utilizing his shooting, and he's probably right now. I mean, you guys might have different thoughts, but for me, he's probably their best shooting option on the perimeter. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he probably is, to be honest. Like, there's not many good three-point shooters on this team, and he's coming from the best three-point shooting team probably in the league in Golden State. Like we mentioned before, Cousins, I think, had the highest percentage for the season for the Pelicans last year.
Yeah, I definitely think it's between Clark and, Etuan Moore had a decent season last year for them.
Oh, yeah. Moore's pretty good too, yeah.
But he doesn't shoot the three at a high percentage. He shoots the three at 37%, but he doesn't shoot a giant quantity of threes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Ian Clark has definitely become the second, if not the best shooter on the team already, by guards and wings.
And they got him at a good rate as well. Like they didn't really have to overpay for him. So I think, if they can continue making those sort of smaller, savvier moves, that's exactly what they need to surround Davis and Boogie with, an Ian Clark versions. And if they can get someone like an Ian Clark, but a guy who can defend as well, then that's just going to be all the more better.
And Clark's young. He's a guy who's only going to be 26 last year. And I'm just looking at his minutes. This guy's last year he played 14.8 minutes per game. That's the highest he's ever played. With the Pelicans, he's probably going to play at least 25 minutes with this current roster.
Yeah, and he has championship experience, which is always an underrated thing. Having a player that's been to the finals 3 years in a row and, winning 2 championships, that's a big deal. And that's at least a bonus to bring to the Pelicans, especially a team that, hasn't been to the postseason in 2 years, and they lost to the Warriors in the first round. They haven't really done much, so it's kind of good to have a player like that around. But departure-wise, they've lost some guys. Quinn Cook, Dante Cunningham, Tim Frazier, Dantes Montejunas, Terrence Jones, Quincy Pondexter. Any of these guys stick out to you?
I think the biggest one is Tim Frazier. He was, not he doesn't turn the needle that much, but in terms of the backup point guard position, they don't really have much. Like you're mentioning, Nick, Rajon Rondo would have been a perfect fit in that if they still had sort of a Tim Frazier. But due to the circumstances that they're in, he provided some nice bench production for them. Quincy Pondexter didn't really provide much last season due to his history of injuries, and he's not going to provide much to the Bulls either. But I think, Tim Frazier, losing him to the Wizards for the 52nd pick, they got him at a ridiculous rate. That's criminal, absolutely criminal in my eyes.
Yeah, Tim Frazier, I think for sure is the only guy you're going to miss. He definitely fell off right around, I want to say, the end of December, early January. He missed a ton of time. But, early on the season when Drew Holiday was out, and we saw what Frazier could do. He had a couple double-doubles. He's really an underrated playmaker. 6'1", he's a little bit undersized. I think that's probably the only guy they truly miss. Because he also was a decent three-point shooter, but for the Wizards, they got a nice player. Yeah,
not a bad pickup by the Wizards at all, especially at the backup point position where they've had some issues in the past. Yeah, like you guys said, I'm not really upset about them losing any of these guys. Cunningham and Pondexter, they just always are injured. They probably could have used them, but they're always hurt, so they need guys that are going to actually play. But talking about guys that are hurt, it was already announced that Solomon Hill is, I think, out for the season. He was pretty much the only small forward on this roster. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, huge loss. He's literally the prototypical 3-and-D sort of guy that they need. He didn't average anything more than 8 points a game, but he can make a three, he can play some decent D. So I think it's really going to leave a lot to someone like Darius Miller, who not many of us know a lot about, but he's certainly going to have a huge role to play because unless Etwan Moore, who's only 6'4", can play above his height and play at the 3, and they're going to have to play some, maybe some 3-guard units possibly. It's going to be interesting to see how Alvin Gentry forms this roster and forms the chemistry here. But yeah, Darius Miller's going to have a lot on his shoulders in that small forward position, unless they can, because they have worked out a few guys. We'll see if they make some other offseason moves.
Yeah, losing Solomon Hill hurts because also that's $12 million that's locked up on a player that's not going to touch the court, which again is just a typical Pelicans issue of a guy who's making decent money, just like Omir Ashik. That's $22 million between two guys, almost $23 million that you're not really going to get a bang for your buck on. And like you said, Darius Miller playing the forward, I'm not sure that's a valuable solution. This is a guy who has barely played on the NBA court, a guy who doesn't shoot the 3 very well at all. The Pelicans are going to need to try and figure something out, whether it's through the G League, free agency, a guy overseas, a trade. You got to get somebody at the wing position, or it's going to be tough. Because I don't think you can really play. I mean, you could, I guess, play Ian Clark at a 3 or try to make a small ball lineup, an extremely small ball lineup. But that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, honestly, that's going to be a huge issue. I think Jack hit it, when he said they're working out a few guys because I think they need to sign a veteran. You're not going to be able to get away with playing 3-guard lineups all game. You can get away for stints, but they need to at least have one competent small forward on this roster. One guy who's done it before, maybe somebody like a Matt Barnes. Not anybody who's going to be an amazing player, but a nice complementary piece.
Is Shabazz Muhammad still a free agent?
Yes, he is. I was about to mention the guys that I think they should target are players like a Shabazz Muhammad, like you said, Nick, Matt Barnes, who can play some nice D, and he was on the Warriors last season. Even a Gerald Green, from the Boston Celtics, hasn't signed a contract yet. And I believe they worked out Josh Smith and Chase Budinger as well. I mean, Josh Smith isn't going to change anything. I mean, and he is a power forword for all.
Yeah, he's more of a 4.
But the fact that they've worked him out shows that they might want to add him to the roster. But Chase Budinger, he might be a temporary solution. But I think, Shabazz Muhammad offensively definitely provides something. And Matt Barnes as a veteran presence, and he has that history again. Not necessarily a good influence on Boogie Cousins, but he has a relationship with Rondo and Cousins, that's for sure.
Even I think Mike Dunleavy is still a free agent too. Even a guy like him, you just gotta add somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the Muhammad addition just because he can't shoot the 3. I'd be probably more interested in a Barnes and a Gerald Green just because they can shoot a little bit better. And in terms of Chase Budinger, I don't think he has any chance. I mean, I've seen him try to make a few rosters in the last few years. It just seems like he's been banged up by injuries and his knees are shot. Josh Smith, like you said, he's more of a 4. So, and Mike Dunleavy, I mean, that's a possibility, but it would be pretty rough if you have to start him at this point in his career.
Oh, for sure.
But that wraps it up for departures. Let's talk about a guy who could possibly be departed with at the end of the season. That's Alvin Gentry. Do you guys think that he's on the hot seat this year?
I think him and Fred Hoiberg are probably the 2 coaches, and even like to a lesser extent, Stan Van Gundy are certainly the coaches that are under the hot seat the most. But like we've sort of been saying with a lot of these, when we're speaking about the coaching, it comes back to the coach is generally the scapegoat for a poor front office. And I think if, Dell Demps can't support Alvin Gentry by, getting some nice pieces like Ian Clark, then I think Alvin Gentry may be out of a job come the end of the season. But through no fault of his own, because, I don't think he is a horrible coach by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that he hasn't been able to form any sort of system around with the utter lack of consistency and the utter lack, like Kory was saying, 26 players. How can you form any sort of system and any consistency when you are playing 20 different lineups with 26 different players? He's going to be the scapegoat likely.
Jack, I couldn't agree more with what you said. Alvin Gentry, if he was to be fired, ownership and everyone in the front office should be ashamed of themselves. Because you can't judge a coach on this kind of body of work when he hasn't been able to put a healthy roster on the floor. And not even that in a healthy roster. I mean, just look at the talent even on the roster last year. There's not a lot of talent that he's been given. I mean, yes, you have Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday, and now you have DeMarcus Cousins. So it's a little bit different. But you can bring in all the guys you want. If you have to play 26 different players within the NBA season, that's going to hurt chemistry. You're going to have, there's just no stability. And like you said, the front office, head coaches at times, I'm trying to think of like Brian Scott. Not that he was a very good coach for the Lakers, but when teams struggle, the head coaches at too many times become the scapegoat and are at fault of poor ownership moves and just poor. I mean, at this point, a poor training staff that can't keep guys on the floor.
Yeah, go ahead,
sorry.
Jack.
I think in a similar vein to what you were saying, Kory, Derek Fisher's probably another one out in New York. They always become the scapegoat for what is poor front office with Phil Jackson and James Dolan. But I think, it's going to be hard for Alvin Gentry, but but it's going to be a wait and see proposition. If his best players can stay healthy, if the big three, for lack of a better term, can stay healthy, then there's certainly some sort of upside for not only the team but for his future job prospects.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see your guys' point. I think Alvin Gentry probably hasn't done the best job, but he's been in some bad circumstances. There's been situations where he probably hasn't handled it correctly and, has done the smart moves on the floor. But like you said, the front office hasn't really gave him the talent. I mean, when you have so much money locked up between Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins, Omar Asik, Alexis Agenta, you're not going to really have, much money to get wings and guards for your roster. So I think that's a real issue. And you guys mentioned it before, the training staff. So the Pelicans just really need to make some big time changes. Let's talk starters. Who's starting for the Pelicans on opening night? This is a tough question.
It's a tough question for probably one or two positions, but I'm going to go with Rajon Rondo, Jrue Holiday, whether they're point guard, shooting guard, that's probably interchangeable. And I hate to say it, but unless they can pick up a Shabazz Muhammad or a Matt Barnes, it's going to be Darius Miller alongside Anthony Davis and Cousins. Pick the odd one out of that crew.
Yeah, Jesus, this is probably the toughest. This might be the toughest lineup to try and pick. The guards for me are the same. I think Rondo starts. I think Jrue Holiday starts at the 2. The 3, it's got to be Darius Miller, unless maybe they start Jordan Crawford in a small lineup. But I don't want Jordan Crawford starting on my roster.
I think they'll probably need him as the backup point guard, really, because he can handle the ball a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess it's going to be Darius Miller. This team has got to be making a move. That's why I make that up. They got to sign somebody. Like I will be shocked if they don't add a wing going into the season, because
maybe they're waiting to training camp cuts. That's the only other thing I can think of. Maybe they're going to try to scoop up a young guy that doesn't make a team or something like that.
Yeah.
I think if Hill didn't get hurt, maybe they don't make a move. But I think Hill going down just kind of makes his team a lock to sign somebody. So the 3 for me is a question mark, because I do think they're going to make a move. But then I think it's obviously Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins as the 4 and the 5.
Yeah, you guys hit it right on the head. It's a small forward that's a question. It's Rajon, Rondo, Jrue Holiday, and then for me, the small forward I believe is not on the roster. I don't believe they'll start Darius Miller. I don't believe they'll start Etuan Moore. I think they'll pick somebody up, even if it's a guy that they're only going to play 20 minutes, just so they can actually have a small forward that can, play in the NBA on the roster. And then obviously Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins.
Yep, you're right.
But breakout starter.
Look, I think you guys might have the same one as me, but I think it's got to be Jrue Holiday. Highest played Pelicans player. The franchise has put their faith in him now. He's got all the tools, all the talent. He's got some great players surrounding him, especially in that front court. He's got to have a massive season, borderline all-star season. He's going to have a career year, that's for sure. But I certainly think he has the capabilities, like you were saying, Nick. He's not horrible on the defensive end either, and he's got offensive capabilities to match it as well.
I'm going with DeMarcus Cousins. And it might not even be a breakout in the point of his stats are going to be crazy, but I think this is a very important season for DeMarcus Cousins as a person as well. We're talking about a guy who every year is very highly scrutinized by the media. Obviously, we know he has a temper, not always a well-directed temper either. We're talking about a guy who gets almost 17 or 16 technicals a season, it feels like. I think this is a big season to finally see if he can play alongside other superstars. is a season that we have to see if he can become a very good player on the defensive end. And for me, I think this is a season that will tell all about DeMarcus Cousins.
Both very good points. I mean, Drew Holiday, like you said, Jack, he needs to step up, especially getting that big contract. And like you said, Kory, this is, probably the first good situation that DeMarcus Cousins is going to be in. In Sacramento, he's never really had an opportunity to make the playoffs. We're not saying this is a great roster, but he does have Anthony Davis alongside him, so there is an opportunity for that. For me, I'm going to cheat a little bit on this one. I'm going to go with the Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins combo. I think for this team to be, great, they're going to probably have to average as a combo 50 points, 20 rebounds, 9 assists, and like 3 or 4 blocks. Like these guys are both going to have to be all-stars, and they're both going to have to be, probably one of the best players at their position for the Pelicans to have a good season. I think they can do it too because they seem to have a really good relationship with each other.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and we saw that they were working out together in that off season. Chemistry starts off the court, like with Chris Paul and James Harden in the off season as well. And if they can develop a chemistry there, then hopefully that translates on court as well.
They're like a perfect match, like a yin to his yang. Like Anthony Davis is like the calm, passive one. DeMarcus Cousins is a little bit more emotional, more than a little, but yeah.
Wasn't the nickname Fire and Ice? I love that nickname. I love it.
Yeah, it's a perfect. So, but breakout bench guy.
You guys will probably have the same one as me. I'll be surprised if you have someone else. But for me, it's got to be Ian Clark. His numbers are going to increase. I think Kory mentioned he played 14 and 15 minutes with the Warriors last season. That's going to skyrocket. So his numbers are going to increase. His percentages might go down, but his volume will certainly go up. So expect to see an increase in points and especially in that 3-point range.
I agree. I mean, for me, it's a toss-up between him and E'Twaun Moore. I think E'Twaun Moore is going to have a very good season as well. But, Ian Clark he's going to be getting for the first time in his career, like we said, more minutes. He'll have a lot of time on the floor. For the first time, we're going to see how he is playing outside of the Warriors offense, playing outside of the that 4-headed dragon outside in the West Coast. East Coast. Stupid. I think Ian Clark, because you're bringing in a guy who is known as a 3-point shooter. He's actually a really good locker room guy from everything I've read. Also, Ian Clark is going to be crucial, especially depending on who they can add before the season starts. The bench guys have a lot of pressure on their shoulders.
Yeah, honestly, both those guys are great picks. E'Twaun Moore and Ian Clark are both going to have to step up, and not only as offensive threats for this team, they're both going to have to play defense, and they're probably both going to have to play out of position at times. Both guys will probably see a few minutes at the 3, even though they're both undersized. I think that's a real possibility. And just to be different, I'm going to go with somebody else. I'm going to go with Cheick Diallo. He'll probably be hopefully their first big off the bench, and he had a nice summer league. He's a little bit more athletic than the other two guys, and he kind of fits more with the new NBA.
He played in Kansas, right? Cheick Diallo?
I believe so. I think this is going to be his second or third year in the league. I remember watching his rookie season. He didn't really do much, but in summer league, he showed some nice stuff. So maybe he can kind of turn that around this year. Obviously, you mentioned Omar Asik before and Alexis Agenta. Like, both those guys are slow and big, and they're not really a good fit for what the rest of the NBA is doing. I know Alvin Gentry said he wants to play big, but you're never going to be able to play both those guys at the same time.
Yeah. He reminds me of a Terrence Jones slightly, probably a little bit better basketball IQ at this stage, but they have that same kind of rebounding tenacity and around the hoop kind of skill.
Let's talk wins. Best case scenario for the Pelicans this year.
Look, I reckon 45 wins is as high as they can go, and maybe pushing. We were saying off air, Nick, that Kory on his Twitter page had them a 7th in the West. I reckon they can go as high as a 6th or a 7th seed. That's all things going well, and all things going well in terms of health. I think that is the key for them. If they can stay healthy, then they can push for a 6th or 7th seed in a really stacked West. But yeah, that's what I think.
Best case scenario, I'm going a tad bit higher. I'm going with like 46 wins, 47 wins. That's Drew Holiday fitting in, and that's DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis, like you said, Nick, averaging 50 points combined, 25 rebounds and 4 to 5 block shots a game. That's everything going, smooth as hell. That's my prediction for them. My best case scenario.
that's majority of the roster playing more than 75% of the games, which is something that probably hasn't happened for the Pelicans in a couple seasons. For me, I'm actually going to agree with you, Kory. I think best case scenario is 46, but I think probably the highest playoff seed they're going to be able to get is a 7th seed. I have a hard time seeing them get higher than 7 just because the West is so stacked.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Jack, Jack mentioned, I did say in my predictions on Twitter the other day that I do think 7th is right around where they lay.
Worst case.
Then the worst case is what happened last year, somewhere around that 35 win mark. They lose DeMarcus Cousins in free agency, and Davis at the end of the year starts to get frustrated with the direction of the franchise, and there's rumblings of the Boston Celtics lurking. That could mean the end of the days for the New Orleans Pelicans, because if they lose Davis, they lose Boogie, then they are as bad as the Philadelphia 76ers in those early 2010s, 2015 sort of range.
Yeah, worst case scenario for me is this team stumbles out the gate. Maybe they win, 10 of their first 30. And we see them trade DeMarcus Cousins again at the deadline. And Anthony Davis becomes tired with the situation. And like you said, Jack, Boston is still, from everything I've heard, is they plan on acquiring Anthony Davis. Like, that's their big push. So they're hoping that this team stumbles. Then I see them finishing with probably right around 30 wins if of a worst case scenario blow up happens.
Yeah, honestly, worst case probably is 30s, or like you guys mentioned, they blow up the team. They move Cousins, Davis is pissed, and Boston throws the Godfather offer at them. But I don't know if they're going to try to move the guys. It's tough to say. The West is just so tough, and they already are going to the season at a disadvantage with the lack of small forwards. So worst case is a little bit more likely than best case, but what do you think realistically is going to happen?
Before we go on to the actual prediction, have you guys heard the rumors of the Cavs offering Iman Shumpert and that Nets pick for DeMarcus Cousins? Do you buy into those rumors, and do you think?
I think that's a fake rumor. I mean, maybe they've had discussions, but I remember the source not being like legitimately as some of the other sources for trade rumors. So I don't think that would probably be enough to get DeMarcus Cousins unless it was like a desperation move by the Pelicans.
Yeah, you'd have to throw in someone else also. I don't know if Iman.
I think they're more interested in Iman Shumpert. They're more interested in Iman Shumpert if they still have Cousins and Davis. And I think that was like a misconception by people on Twitter, is that I think they want Shumpert now with the team that they have because they need a small forward, they need a defensive wing, and he could fill that role. They don't want to trade Cousins and get Shumpert. That wouldn't really make much sense. They'd be taking a salary dump when they're getting rid of a good player, a really good player. So I don't really buy into that.
And from the Cavs' perspective, they would have to move a Tristan Thompson to get Cousins or a Kevin Love, because you wouldn't be able to bring in DeMarcus Cousins while keeping the bigs they have on the roster.
If they wanted to maybe move Love in a Cousins trade and maybe the Nets pick and some other pieces involved or something like that, I think that's a more likely option than Shumpert in the net.
And I think the Pelicans would be really good with a Kevin Love on that roster. Actually, he might fit in a little bit better.
That'd be actually really fun to watch.
I'd like to see that. For lack of a better term, I'd love to see that. To see Love paired with Anthony Davis, that'd be that's exactly what they need. They need a stretch big guy, so Anthony Davis can do his work on the inside. But in terms of actual prediction, I reckon they'll be around that 500 mark, somewhere around 40 to 43 wins, and they might. I think they've got the potential and the talent to stick in for an 8th spot, but I think they'll be on the fringes at a 9 or a 10 like they were last year.
I think they finished the season winning 44, 45 games. I do think this team makes the playoffs. I'm saying, obviously a 7 seed. So I'm thinking right around 44, 45 wins.
I'm going to give him 42 wins for the season. I think injuries are just a question mark. I think Davis and Cousins will have a big year. The Rondo and Holiday combo, I'm not completely sold on yet. I think they'll be a fringe playoff team. I could see them as an 8th seed. I also could see them in that 9, 10, or 11 spot, not getting in and missing by a few games. I don't think they'll be a lottery team, but I think they'll be in the playoff picture, but I'm not locking them in quite yet.
That's fair.
Let's go with the truth. Now, I got 2 emojis today for the truth, and they're both about DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis. First one is going to be Team Skyscraper, so the emoji of the skyscraper, because, this is probably the best big man combo in the NBA.
Nice.
And then I got the yin and the yang emoji as well because I think they're a perfect balance to each other.
That is perfect. Your emoji game has been on point in these pods, Nick. I think you've just got to have to take the reins with this because I think mine's okay. I've got the sort of the fearful face because there's a lot of things that could go wrong with this season. And a lot of them are likely to go wrong, whether it be injuries, whether it be rumblings in terms of chemistry, whether it's lineup issues. So yeah, I've got that sort of fearful face where the eyes are really shocked and the face is going blue a little bit.
Kind of like every time Anthony Davis comes down from a rebound and has like a cringe on his face, you're like, ugh.
All right.
That's literally the emoji. Like that's where they got it from. They got it from DeMarcus Cousins and his.
That Nick, you're killing. You're making it tough on me. I thought I had a really good one, and now I'm questioning myself. So the one I have the
That's why I'm here.
I have the meteor one, and the point of the meteor one is that this team can either come down and crash and burn, or they can hit the NBA hard and be a threat with the two, fire and ice, DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis.
Oh, that's a good one though, because I mean it's pretty spot on. They could either crash and burn, or they can crash and burn other people.
Double-edged emoji.
Yeah, that's my thought.
Let's talk League Pass. Where do the Pelicans rank in your League Pass ranking 1 through 10?
Look, I've got them around the average. I've got them at a 5 just because of Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. Like, you're going to tune in for those guys. Outside of that, am I really going to want to watch Rajon Rondo? I'm going to want to watch him alongside DeMarcus Cousins. But for me, the main reasons are those two skyscraper dudes. I'm giving them a 5. They could push a 6 on a good day if things go well with injuries.
I'm looking at a 6 again. I feel like I'm stuck here. Like I can't give guys too many higher ratings yet at this point of our preview series. So I'm going to say right around a 6.
6 for me too. I mean, the one reason I watch more Pelicans games than their talent says is just because Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. Last year there was times where you saw on Twitter, it's like, oh shit, DeMarcus Cousins has 30 points and 22 rebounds and he's going into the fourth quarter. Or the same thing with Anthony Davis. They have these games where it's like 50, 60 points, 20 plus rebounds. Also, they're always big fantasy players. Obviously, some of that's going to calm down with them both being on the same team, but having two guys, that are potentially, top 10, top 15 players on the same team, and like I said, maybe the best at their positions, is not something you see a lot in the NBA. I can't really recall the last time we've seen a front court with this much talent offensively and even defensively. Cousins isn't a huge shot blocker, but he knows how to take a charge, and Davis is an athletic freak.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair.
But you'd watch the Pelicans over what TV show that you like?
So it's something that I enjoy, but I watch sporadically like I do with the Pelicans. So two sort of Netflix hits, the Daredevil and Orange is the New Black. So they're shows that I've watched, but I haven't been able to commit the time to watch consistently.
Damn, that Daredevil one really hurt, Jack. That hurt.
I like it, but I haven't been able to get into the end of the first season and the start of the second season yet. And then, I really want to watch The Defenders, but I feel like I need to watch all the other shows. Like I'm just starting on Jessica Jones now with my girlfriend. So
yeah, I would recommend watching all 4 of them before you watch The Defenders because there's just like little tiny hints of different stuff that you'll see. And also when you watch the first 4 shows, Iron Fist, Daredevil, Luke Cage, and Jessica Jones, just look out for little points of the Defenders and like little stuff because they do have it in there, but you don't know it until you watch The Defenders.
Look, mate, you hurt me with the Bob's Burgers call in the previous pod, so I'm going to with this Daredevil one, all right?
As
Fair
someone,
enough.
I can understand, Jack, because I didn't like Daredevil either. Sorry, Nick. But
oh, guys, I'm going to end this pod real quick. Bye.
All right, so, oh, man, Pelicans. I watched them over. I'm torn between 2 shows, but I'm going to go with one that I know, Nick, you like as well, Breaking Bad.
That's okay.
That's harsh.
Breaking Bad hasn't been on TV in a while. The series is obviously over, and I've watched it already 2 times through, and I stopped watching it my 3rd time through. So I think at this point in time, the Pelicans over Breaking Bad.
I think that's a fair choice because Breaking Bad doesn't really have much rewatch value. Like I watched it the first time, and then my girlfriend watched it for the first time, and I kind of caught it on some of the episodes. Some of them are interesting. Some of it's not as interesting because you already know what Walter's going to do. But That's a fair one, Kory, because a lot of times when you rewatch a show, it's just not going to be as good unless you love that show. For me, I'm going to go with, I don't know if you guys know the show, Quantico. I'd watch the Pelicans over Quantico.
Yep.
It was like pretty good in the first season, but it just gets a little bit too corny and the acting's a little bit dry. So it's just like,
Interesting choice. You're not going for the big ones anymore, Nick. Have you gotten some hate from the people at NBC and Fox for all those big takes on Bob's Burgers and Friends and stuff?
Yeah, they're like trying to shut down my social media. It's crazy.
See out here.
I mean, Quantico was like supposed to be a good show, but that didn't really work out. But I had to dive into my own personal shows now. So from here on out, I have to actually start picking shows that I kind of liked. I kind of liked Quantico in the beginning, but now not really. I'm really interested when we get into the top 5. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to, throw shade at some of my favorite shows.
I can't believe I gave up Narcos already on this podcast preview series.
That too. You also have to make sure you're not giving up a show that you might need later on. You might be, underselling a show and you're like, shit, this works perfect for this team.
You two have got it tough because you've got 30 sort of TV shows that you've got to sort of like keep in the back pocket, like doing all of these ones. I've got 10 or 12. So for me, it's a little bit easier. For you guys, you've got it a bit tough.
I seriously sit on Hulu and Netflix and go through watched already just to see what I can pick.
I'm at the point right now where I might have to re-listen to every single podcast just so I don't use a show twice because I'm starting to forget what shows I've used.
Yeah, Jack's right. It's getting tough. But that wraps it up for today. Kory and Jack, great show. Thanks for hopping on, guys. And as always, thanks everybody for listening.
Ciao, guys.
Always a pleasure, boys.